So imagine the loss of real estate when you set aside those 2 floors instead, just to let the wind blow through. Very expensive. You're missing out on millions. But again, very necessary if you want more than half your population to be able to actually live inside. This gives you an idea of just how much lake effect wind we're dealing with. Again, we'll talk about those 2 other methods of sway reduction later on the tour. Also, roof of this building is actually 25 feet taller than our second tallest building's roof. It just has a spire on it that propels it over that into its second place height. It's in front of us there, Trump International Hotel and Tower, created by the world's tallest architect, Adrian Smith. He was only 5'7". It's not where he gets the name. Had to shout out a fellow short king. It's because he created the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. It's the same general design as this one, nearly 2 times the size. Imagine 2 of these buildings stacked on top of one another. That's how tall the world's tallest building is. Gives you an idea, truly massive. And those different balconies on either side leads to the effect of vortex swirling. This is an aerodynamic building, so the wind whips off the side. It's not affected by sway in the same way a lot of our taller and more boxy buildings are. It's one of the ways you can avoid the issue of sway mostly altogether. Also on the left, we got our multi-leveled street, Wacker Drive, 3 parts, upper Wacker, lower Wacker, and lower Wacker. Filmed a lot of movies on all of these. Upper Wacker, part of the Blues Brothers, my best friend's wedding. Lower Wacker is the seedy Gotham underbelly from The Dark Knight. Filmed most of the Batman movies down there. Now again, we'll get a couple movie references on this tour. I graduated from Columbia College with a screenwriting degree. But I'd wait for some of my other Dark Knight locations, because lower Wacker is the spot to get lost in the city. I can't tell you how many Ubers I've been in, just going in circles down there. If you're driving, keep it to Upper Wacker. Thank me later. Now coming up on the right following this next bridge is a yellow onion dome on a building on top of the Intercontinental Hotel. Again, it's celebrating our name, the Little Stinky Onion. But believe it or not, that onion dome is not the interesting part of the building. It's a smokestack that's just beyond that onion dome. It's going to be on the right here. Back when this building was built in the 1920s, we thought Zeppelin shop would be the way we got around in the future. Giant blimps. So that smokestack was a spot where you could park your Zeppelin, enter the hotel, have a valet park or take it elsewhere. Unfortunately, the Hindenburg crash, giant blimp crash, happened a few years after it was built, so it was never going to take off. In fact, there's only 25 blimps in the world right now. But that's a very cool moment in history that's preserved in the architecture. This is the theme we'll keep exploring on our tour. What our buildings tell us about the time periods they come from. And you're not going to find a Zeppelin dock on buildings nowadays. It's just that old way of thinking preserved in the architecture. But more on that later. Also, looking ahead, you may see the glass facade of the Apple Store. Again, that's where DuSalvo first set up shop in Chicago. It's where our origin story begins. And just beyond that is a white building, clock tower on top. The Wrigley Building. Built with revivalist style architecture. A popular style from the 1880s to the early 1920s. Just following the Great Chicago Fire. We're starting to rebuild our city. But we want to prove to the rest of the world that we're just as beautiful as any place else. Just don't have our own style of architecture yet. We're still figuring out who we are. So, we copy what Europe's doing, and we paste it right here in Chicago. This is based off a cathedral you can still find in Spain. So it's Spanish revivalism, to get specific, although that's not the only kind. There's a lot of different subsections. In fact, in just a moment, beyond the Apple Store on the right, you'll be able to see a building that looks like a French cathedral had a baby with an office building. That's the French Gothic revivalist style of the Tribune Tower. They give away that style as the flying buttresses at the top, the archways with a gap. And I love a big buttress, I cannot lie. But as beautiful as both of these buildings are, they're not our designs. We're just copying them from Europe and pasting them here. So again, they're beautiful, but they're not original. They're not ours. Fast forward to modern day, architecturally, we do the exact opposite. We're all about site-specific design that's called contextualism. These buildings factor in the context of their environment and incorporate it within the design. The motto is of a place, for a place, by a place. That means you can't copy and paste anything. Even if you try and put it someplace else in Chicago, it's not going to work like it does exactly the site where it's located. Great example of contextualism coming up on the other side of this bridge. Once again, our second tallest building, Trump Tower. Now you can notice it's got 3 terraces or setbacks going up the building there. Those terraces match the height of the surrounding buildings. So that first terrace matches the height of the Wrigley Building right next to it. It's the same height. It mirrors its neighbor intentionally. That second terrace matches the Mather Tower, which is the white telescope-looking building across the river from it. The third terrace matches that black box that's barely sticking out the side. It's the AMA building just beyond it on the river. But it doesn't just match the building height of its neighbors, it also matches building tone. It's sandwiched between the all-white Wrigley Building, the all-black AMA building, so this bluish-grayish glass creates a transitional element between the two buildings. Again, it's blending all of its surroundings into a single design, which is why it doesn't work if you try and put it anyplace else in the city. It doesn't pay
tối nay vô chum ngủ đêm đi.
That's the beauty of contextualism. It only works in this particular context. We'll break down a few more later. Also, at the top of Trump Tower is its penthouse, which comes complete with 14,000 square feet of space, 5 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a private elevator, and access to the building's spa, gym, and indoor pool. If you were hoping to sign a lease by end of my tour, sorry to say, just sold this year, $20 million. That's the second most expensive real estate purchase in Chicago history, and 28,000 times my monthly rent. I did the math. And if you're looking for something that's more in my tax bracket, I actually have a recommendation. Coming up in just a moment, one of the more affordable spots to live downtown. For a studio or one-bedroom apartment, all the listings inside go from $1,300 to $2,000 a month. Which may not sound cheap depending on where you're from, but for downtown Chicago, and right across the street from that $20 million suite, you're probably not going to find a better deal. I will warn you though, these are pie slice shaped apartments, which means it's kind of hard to fit your furniture in those. But again, when it comes to a deal, you're not going to find a better one, especially not downtown along the river. It's these 2 corncob buildings coming into view on the right, Marina City Towers, iconic apartments from the 1960s. Back when they were built in the 60s, not a whole lot of apartments downtown. So these buildings are also self-sustainable. They have everything you'd find in a modern city within the building itself. Inside, you can still find a fully functional grocery store, movie theater, bowling alley, ice skating rink, swimming pool. Even the parking's on the lower levels. There are restaurants beneath that. And following the bridge on the right, you can also see where it gets its name. It's attached to an actual functional marina. You can park your boat here too. You can access all of that from the building without changing out of your pajamas. It's an introvert's dream. You can also get a better view of the parking on the lower levels following the bridge here. Cars have only come on the backside twice. Don't worry, both were intentional. One was a Steve McQueen movie called The Hunter. The other was an Allstate commercial. Did the same thing a few years ago. But it is somebody's job to valet park all those cars. So if you ever feel like your job is stressful, just keep in mind it could probably always be worse. Left-hand side, we got a small concrete building with 5-5 at the top. 5-5 West Wacker. We call this the Danny DeVito of buildings because it's short stubbing between those supermodels. This is a brutalist building, which doesn't have to do with its brutal boxy appearance like you might think. It's actually the material it's made out of. Brutalism comes from the French term béton brut, which means raw concrete. That rough, unfinished exterior is a dead giveaway of brutalism. Popular style from the 60s. Supermodel next to that's a sleek glass building. Following or through the bridge, you can actually look up to the top and see what looks like the Parthenon up there. It's got the traditional pediment, which is that triangle design you'll find above Greek and Roman temples. This is a neoclassical design from the 1990s. Again, we're still borrowing European aesthetics from the past, just like revivalism. But nowadays, instead of copying and pasting our designs, we make remixes. We take old forms of architecture, improve them with modern technology, update them to the modern era. So again, putting our own stamp on buildings now too, not just copying and pasting straight up, like the Wrigley building. Also to the left, you can see and hear our Riverwalk. This is a fairly new addition in Chicago. Phase 3 finished in 2016. Cost $112 million in total. It added spots to grab a bite to eat or drink. You can catch live shows, or, and we got an amphitheater here too. They got some live shows that happen around here as well. There are spots to go fishing, spots to dip your kayak in the river. But my favorite addition with the Riverwalk was a fish hotel. Sounds weird, but we actually have a spot where local fish species can hide from predators and boats that patrol the waters. And since the 70s, over 60 species of fish have returned to the river. So it's actually doing its job, helping us repair the ecosystem and establish a better relationship to this river, which is very important. Because again, as I mentioned, owe a lot of our success and our name to these waterways, but despite that, haven't treated it with respect until much more recently. Used it for transportation, trade, even sewage at one point in time, so it never quite had the relationship with it we're trying to establish now. In fact, one of the biggest concerns I get of people visiting the city is about dyeing the river green every year for St. Patrick's Day, worried about the pollution. But you don't have to worry, it's not toxic sludge or anything we're pumping in our river, it's non-toxic vegetable dye. It's actually orange. Fish can eat it. We call it leprechaun dust, and Shoreline's the company that does it. Put in the back of one of our boats, drive up and down till it mixes with the already green shade of our river to make it pop, make neon green. Only year that tradition was ever an issue was the very first year we did it. We used 2.5 times the amount of dye we use now, over 100 pounds. Dyed a river green for about 2 weeks. But thankfully, we perfected that amount of dye. It's not too big a concern anymore. Washes after about 3 days every year. So you don't have to worry, it's in good hands too. in just a moment. Another very cool style of architecture. It's what came after revivalism in the mid-1920s. It's only popular for about 5 years, but despite that, very influential in not just Chicago, but the U.S. in general. It's going to be on the right following the bridge, Merchandise Mart, a great example of Art Deco style architecture. It's got this sturdy Indiana limestone as its base material, all about streamlined verticality. Draws your eyes upward, makes the building look even bigger than it is. Every Art Deco building is competing for your attention, trying to be the biggest and best in the block. Draw your attention in, away from its other competitors. You can also see the gold ornamentation over the windows up there. That's the glitzy lamp of the Roaring Twenties coming out in building form. Think Great Gatsby. That's what these buildings embody. We'll talk a little bit more about the history behind Art Deco and several other styles later, but first, to the right, 8 different busts, celebrating 8 retail titans that used to shop in the mart. We got Aaron Montgomery Ward of the Montgomery Ward store. We sued the city a few times to keep the lakefront free of any buildings. Usually had to thank for our open, clear, free lakefront. And Marshall Field of the Field Museum and Marshall Field store. Also coined the term, get the lady what she wants. Or to keep in mind if you shop along the Magnificent Mile while you're here. Now, opposite side of Franklin Street Bridge here, get those cameras up again. We get another beautiful trophy case of architecture at Wolf Point, where the 3 branches of the river meet. Especially with the sun where it's at right now, it is a beautiful shot. Take it in.
Đẹp quá ha, cái tòa này đẹp quá không? Wow, mấy cái đẹp quá trời đẹp.
On the left here, first building to point out, we got a curved glass building. This is the new Veen building. It's Ferris Bueller's dad's office from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But the curve of that building matches the curve of the river where it's located. And that greenish-bluish tint is meant to unite the greenish tint of the river and bluish tint of the sky. So again, blends all that's around it. That's contextualism. We got another contextualist building in front of us. A giant stick of deodorant. A McDonald's apple pie. A Hot Pocket. Take your pick, any one of those. That's River Point. Curved top and entrance, just like the curve of the river right next door. And our last contextualist building is just beyond that bridge on the left. We got a building with a Y shape at its base. 150 North Riverside. Now that Y shape pays tribute to where we are because Wolf Point, with the 3 branches of the river meet, literally makes a giant Y if you're looking at a map of Chicago. This was our first neighborhood here. First taverns, hotels, ferries, all cropped up right here at Wolf Point. So we owe a lot to this spot, pay tribute to it in our designs. It's kind of a fun to Where's Waldo while you're here. If you pay attention, you will find Ys hidden all throughout our city. We've got buildings that look like Ys, even the benches at Navy Pier look like Ys. It's even on the Chicago Theater, but since it's in a circle, a lot of people think it's a peace sign. It's not, it's the Y. So again, if you do keep an eye out for these Ys, you'll find them all throughout the city, thanks to Wolf Point here, our first neighborhood. And coming into view around this bend is a bridge suspended over the river. The Carroll Ave Railway Bridge used to allow trains to and from the neighborhoods on the right, but nowadays it only comes down once a year just to make sure it still works. It's a designated landmark in 1997. But we still have 37 movable bridges here in Chicago. That's the most in the U.S. Second most in the world, behind Amsterdam, actually. And our bridges are known all throughout the world, too. They're called Chicago-style, double-leaf, trunnion bascule bridges. There's a lot there. Double-leaf means they open in 2 parts, separating through the middle. The 2 bridges in front of us are single-leaf. They operate 1 giant part instead, so a little bit different than our typical bridge. Trunnion means attached to the axles on the riverbanks, and bascule means seesaw, or teeter-totter. It's the method we use to move them. On this particular bridge, you can see a giant concrete block attached to the back. That's the counterweight that's required to move this bridge up and down. It is 3 times the weight of the bridge itself. That's always true. You just don't normally see them because they're in our bridge houses, like Kenzie Street behind it there. That yellow structure that houses the counterweight. Weight goes down, bridge comes up. This one wears it on its sleeves to get an idea of just how much weight's required to move them. So imagine 3 times the weight of 37 of our bridges downtown. That's how much weight we need in order to make sure boats can get through to the Mississippi even to this day. They open twice a week in the spring and fall. You can look up the schedule if you want to see it yourself, or avoid the traffic that comes with that happening. Also on the left, we got some triangle apartments, the River Cottages, built by Harry Weeks, 1988. It's postmodernism. The porthole windows and triangle designs are a nod to the boats and their sails around here. But it's not just clever design, it's also revolutionary, because it faces the river. And in the 80s, you didn't want to face the river like you did now. Again, didn't treat it with more respect until much more recently than the 80s. So, it was starting to change our mentality of how we should be treating the river as early as the 80s. It's also more affordable downtown real estate. You want to live there? Just $2 million a pop. That's not a problem. You might also want to check out the gym we'll see on the right here, the East Bank Club. Famous folks who work down inside like Jesse Jackson, Billie Jean King, Michael Jordan, even Oprah and Obama have worked down there. If you want to join that club, all you need is $500 for the activation fee and over $200 a month after that. I have cheaper gym and apartment recommendations if you need. You can find me during or after the tour. Now, we're going to make our first U-turn here in just a moment. Head down the South Branch where there's more fun things to see, do, and talk about. In the meantime, it's an ideal moment to use the restrooms in the back if you have to. Pay Zach a visit at the bar for a refreshment or a refill, or ask me a question. I'll be coming around. If you have any questions during that time, just say, "Hey Jack," flag me down. We'll get those taken care of. When we head down the South Branch, a lot of history to come. We got some different styles of architecture to go over and some main historical characters too. Still a lot more to come. Stay tuned.
Ở dưới đó có bán đồ ăn nữa đâu đúng không? Ở dưới đó lắm.
Nó là kho bắt uống rượu rồi à.
Nó ve lại á. Hết rồi. Bye bye. Chicago bắt đầu lên đèn.
All right, guys, we'll get moving here in just a moment again. Head down the South Branch. Want to give you some recommendations, because as I mentioned, if you're looking for a nightlife downtown, you're probably going to be disappointed. It's because we don't really live downtown if you haven't picked up on those real estate prices. So you will want to get out into a neighborhood, which is where we find those nightlifes here. I do want to point out one that is downtown. It's a great option for you. It's on the left-hand side from where we are now, just beyond the East Bank Club. It's called River North. Of all the neighborhoods in the city, highest concentration of entertainment and restaurant venues of any of them. It's right over there. So there's always something to see and do. They brag a cultured daytime and a festive nightlife, which means during the daytime, beautiful Gothic-style cathedrals, art and architecture galleries. Didn't scratch the itch on the tour. Plenty more where that came from in River North. But come nighttime, again after the tour, on Hubbard Street and Clark Streets. Either one, you're going to find a high concentration of bars, clubs, restaurants, live music venues, up and down both. A lot of those open until 2 o'clock in the morning. Some specifics, Hubbard Street has Shaw's, really good seafoods and steaks. There's Andy's Jazz on Hubbard as well, which is live music and it's family friendly. So you can hear some live jazz music while you're getting something to eat or drink at the same time. Also, lots of really good food, specifically on Ontario and Ohio Streets. In fact, one of my main food recommendations is on Ontario. It's called Portillo's. We'll break down your different Chicago-style food options later on the tour in a little more depth. But they have all sorts of Chicago-style hot dogs, Italian beef sandwiches, and something called a chocolate cake shake. It's a piece of chocolate cake mixed in your milkshake. It's fantastic. Again, just make sure you got enough time for a nap afterwards. It's kind of a night ender. But they are open till midnight, and just a short jog from where we end the tour. So if you want directions, I can point you the right way. Also, since we got some time, I'll give you one extra nightlife recommendation. It's the name of our hipster neighborhood here in the city. It's called Wicker Park. Wicker like the chair. Take the blue line out to the Damon stop. During the day, you'll find all sorts of vinyl record stores, thrift shops, small businesses, and during nighttime, great place to eat and drink up and down Milwaukee. A lot of novelty bars out there, open way late in the night. It's also more of a feel of what a Chicagoan neighborhood is like, where people actually live. So again, if you're looking for that authentic Chicagoan experience, that's the spot to go. It might be worth doing. You can also take the blue line 2 extra stops out to Logan Square, which is even more residential, and you'll find even more bars and breweries on Milwaukee Street again. So either one of those, really good nightlife. And again, River North is probably your best downtown nightlife option. Now, again, if you do have any questions on anything we mentioned on the tour, which is a lot, you need refreshers on any of it, or additional directions, suggestions, nightlife options, anything like that, that's what I'm here for. So again, we'll have a couple more breaks before the end of the tour. Don't hesitate to ask questions during that time so I can point you the right way. Again, use me as a resource if you feel like you need it. I'll also be standing someplace after the tour to point you the right way. So please have me help out if you need any of it. Now, back to Wolf Point here. On this next portion, to the right, you can notice some circles that run the area. These are actually fans. They're keeping air circulating in the train tracks beneath that run to and from our suburbs. But that means the buildings over here have to purchase air construction rights from the railway. The right to build, lease, and construct over track. These particular railways sell them for $1.3 million a year for 99 years. So it's super expensive and restrictive if you're leasing over here. And if you're building, you also got to get clever with your designs to avoid those train tracks. It's part of the reason River Point has a curved entrance. You may notice there's also a lean to it. If you were to drill straight down from the top of that entrance, you'd hit those train tracks. So it has to put its structural support elsewhere. It leans in and outward to avoid those tracks. And that's also part of the reason 150 North Riverside up here is shaped like a giant Y. It's sandwiched between the Chicago Riverwalk on one end and active Amtrak trains on the other. So it can only use 20% of its lot space at its base. Because of that, this lot sat vacant for over 80 years. This is prime real estate downtown. We just didn't know what to do with it. Because until recently, when technology allowed you to make a Y-shaped building, you're missing out on a majority of your space because of the particular confines of this lot. But as you can imagine, a Y-shaped building has some structural difficulties. Again, sway factors in with more creatively designed buildings like this, same as it does with our taller buildings. What 150 North Riverside does to cut back its sway is called inertial slosh dampers. Inside, there are 12 massive concrete tanks that are filled with 160,000 gallons of water. When it gets hit with a gust of wind, the water in those tanks sloshes the opposite way. So it provides a natural counterbalance to any sway against the wind and literally holds the building in place. Instead of going back and forth every gust of wind it gets, it stays put thanks to the counterbalance tanks. It's a very cool and confusing method of sway reduction, very modern. But we'll talk about one more method, round out the different things you can use. This building is also a great example of what a contemporary style building looks like. It's the style of buildings we're making now. It's just like your smartphone. Sleek on the outside, jam-packed filled with technology on the inside. Same is true for modern buildings. We got more access to technology than ever before, so we can solve problems with that tech we couldn't up until recently. That's how you end up with Y-shaped buildings to maximize your space, or slosh dampers to cut back your sweat. Again, with that technology, you can also make it look very nice and state-of-the-art on the outside. So that's a big part of contemporary style architecture too. And again, all of this is summed up very well by a building that's going to come up in just a moment. So on the opposite side of this next bridge, Randolph Street, coming up on the left, this is the Bank of America building. Now, it had a very similar problem to 150 North Riverside here, and the fact that it had to keep the Riverwalk free for the Riverwalk project. Back in the day, that meant you just got to miss out on that space. There's not much you can do about it. Sorry. But thanks to this new technology, that's not true anymore. All you got to do to maximize your space in this particular building is vault the third floor of your building with these giant steel I-beams that structurally hold your building up and secure it. Now, steel I-beams are not very attractive on the outside. So you also cover it up with some attractive stainless steel, so it draws people in, looks sleek on the outside too. But structurally, you can still build all the way to the top of your building with no problem. We weren't able to do this until much more recently in architecture. So it's a great example of how far technology continues to push architecture into the future, and a great timestamp for where we're at now. Because on this next portion of the tour, we're going back in time, talking about how Chicago's architecture has evolved alongside history. Again, we begin following the fire in the 1880s with revivalism, copying and pasting our designs from Europe, like the Wrigley Building. That takes us up to the mid-1920s when we switch over to Art Deco style architecture. Another example on the right, Riverside Plaza, the old Daily News building. When we're making these buildings in the roaring 20s, we're looking optimistically to the future, pouring all our money and resources into buildings to be the biggest and best in the block, because life is good. What could possibly go wrong? I'll give you an idea of what went wrong. Left-hand side, Civic Opera Building. Opened 2 weeks after the stock market crashed in 1929. It only made it for about 3 years before it went bankrupt. So, shortly following the Art Deco era comes the Great Depression. So it gets cut short as an architectural style, run out of money. And shortly after the Great Depression comes World War II. So there's a big break in building from the 1930s to the 50s. We go back to building after the war. Buildings start looking incredibly different. Coming up on the right, 2 large black steel boxes. Modernist office buildings from the 50s. After World War II, there's a big return to the workforce. Need office buildings quick to accommodate that surge. At the same time, we're still broke. So these buildings gotta be cheap too. Mies van der Rohe champions this style. Takes architecture back to its 3 most basic building blocks. Skeleton, skin, and space. The skeleton is the steel aluminum frame that hold these buildings up. These are office buildings, so they're all business. They're not trying to wow you in the same way an Art Deco building does. Their only concern is fulfilling the function of an office building. If they've done that, they're successful. So they ditch all the ornamentation of Art Deco, get back to basics. They don't need all that. The skin is the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the space are the plazas that surround each and every one of these buildings. Now again, these are very functional, utilitarian buildings, but they're also quite sterile, not very human. So to humanize them, we keep these plazas as a spot where you can enjoy your lunch, feel like more than just a cog in the machine. That's the psychological effect of space. There's no agenda behind it. It allows room for you to exist as you are. No pressure to go anywhere or be anybody you might not be. It's very necessary when you work in a giant black sterile box. You need that room for you too. And also, no matter where you put these in our city, they stick out. They are buildings outside of time and location. No matter where you put them, they just don't quite belong. And so eventually this style's architecture slowly softens and becomes an international style. Ahead on the right, white box building, Gateway 3. Which probably looks like a building you have in your own hometown too. In the 1970s, that was the international style. You could pick it out of most places in the world. We did steel and aluminum, did with concrete and marble, but that's the biggest change. On the outside, these buildings still look very similar. Boxy shapes, plazas, lack of ornamentation. They're your typical no-frills office buildings. The biggest change isn't on the outside, it's the mentality behind the building, the reason why we're making them. We're no longer making quick and cheap buildings after World War II. We are now actively trying to fit in. We are doing what everybody else is doing, because again, we're searching for belonging. Now that search for belonging continues into the 1980s, which is when contextualism starts to take on. And if you're not careful, all these different eclectic styles of architecture will make your city feel like a random collection of buildings that's competing for your attention, instead of a city or neighborhood. You lose sight of the big picture when you only think about your building. And so contextualist buildings, like the one ahead, another curved glass building, they are team players. They sacrifice their own personal identity to collaborate with their neighbors instead of compete. So the shapes of these buildings, the shades, the glass, and the setbacks, they all reflect what's around it. No 2 contextualist buildings look the same, because no 2 spots in the city are the same either. They blend all the styles of architecture and elements of the city together to create more intentional, collaborative neighborhoods. They're all about community. Yeah, they blend it all together, really pull together the big picture of the city. That's why it's some of my favorite architecture, very intentional stuff. It's also still very alive and well today. But contemporary style architecture is not just about tech advancements. It's using that tech to create a remix, like the neoclassical building we saw earlier. Again, taking these old forms of architecture, improving them with that new technology, and updating them to the modern era. We got another remix coming up here on the left. This is a modernist building, added a You Are Here map to the side in 2014. You can look up, see a red box. That's where we are on the river. And if you draw your eyes up past that, you can also see the literal Chicago Y of Wolf Point, where the 3 branches of the river meet. It really does make a Y if you look at a map like that. Another remix coming up here on the right. Art Deco style building, all lit up, the Old Main Post Office. The opening sequence of The Dark Knight, Joker ziplines onto the roof of this building, robs a bank, drives a bus through the side of it, getting away with the cash. But it never used to be a bank, it actually used to be our post office. And nowadays it's just regular offices. It underwent a $900 million renovation last year, and with that comes a very cool addition. Largest private rooftop garden in the world. It's 3.5 acres of space called the Meadow. Comes complete with walking trails, basketball and pickleball courts, a bistro bar, local plant species, all on the roof of that building. It's unfortunately private, which means you gotta know someone who works there to get up there. But it does make it a green building. It's LEED certified. It stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, which is another big facet of modern architecture. It's not just about playing nice with your neighbors, but also with the environment. reducing your carbon footprint. And here in Chicago, we have more LEED certified buildings than any other city in the U.S. We're quite literally leading the green charge, which you may not be aware of. But that catches up to modern day from an architecture lens. We're going to go back in time once more, talk about how we got here, some of the influential characters and events of our past that have shaped us into who we are today. We'll start that story October 8th, 1871. It's a Sunday night, 9 p.m. Pretty quiet night in Chicago, not much is happening. Until suddenly, 4 blocks to the right of where we are now, a fire breaks out for an unknown reason at the O'Leary Range. Over the next 3 days, 32 hours, this fire slowly spreads, consumes everything we can see on our tour, destroys 3.5 square miles of the downtown area. All but 7 public buildings downtown completely destroyed. It renders a third of our population homeless and causes an estimated $4 billion in modern-day damages. This is the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Still, largest urban fire in history. Now the main question on everyone's mind, rightfully so, how'd the fire start? We're looking for a scapegoat. In this case, Escape Cal.